Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, everyone. I like to start promptly. Welcome to the meeting of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor Paul Ray, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed onto the City Council's website so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. I'm now going to invite members and officers to introduce themselves, going in this direction around. So over to you.
I'm Kate Sadler and I'm the lead officer on this committee.
John Illingworth from Kirkstall Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Morel Midgley from the Kpis and Methley Ward.
Good afternoon, Paul Triswell, Councillor for Middleton and Belle Isle.
Afternoon, I'm Rebecca Roberts, Legal Officer.
Hello, I'm Louise Booth. I'm the Head of Internal Audit.
Hello, I'm Louise Ivans, Principal Audit Manager.
Jonathan Foster, Senior Audit Manager.
Good afternoon, Tim Rollett from the Council's Intelligence and Policy Service.
Hi, Sandeep Gattore, Information Governance, representing the Data Protection Officer.
Hello, Mary Hasnip, Head of Finance within Corporate Financial Management.
Simon Foy, Head of Intelligence and Policy.
Victoria Bradshaw, Chief Financial Officer.
Gareth Mills, Grant Thornton, External Audit.
Perminder Setti, Grant Thornton, External Audit.
Linda Wild, Independent Member.
Peter Heron, Councillor for Audley.
Jackie Shemilt, Councillor for Horsforth.
Afternoon, Billy Flynn, Councillor for Adlam Wharfdale.
Debbie Oldham, and I'm the clerk to the committee.
Thank you very much for that, everyone. Item agenda number 1.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there are no exempt items. Agenda item 3, there are no late items. Agenda item 4, could I ask members if they have any declarations of interest? I'll take silence as there are none. And agenda item 5, apologies for absence have been received from Councillors Downs and Councillor Smart.
Thank you very much for that. Item agenda number 6 and 7, first of all, in relation to the minutes. For those members who are actually a member of the committee last time, are these minutes a correct record of the meeting held on the 4th of February? I've got proposed a seconder. There we go. Are there any matters arising from those minutes? Oh, yeah.
Just a couple of matters arising, Chair. Under minute 81 in relation to customer contact, the requested information was circulated to then members of the committee on the 25th of April, and there was liaison between the then chair of committee and the chair of the Scrutiny Board for Strategy and Resources. There is work ongoing within that Scrutiny Board looking at the Customer Contact Centre update plan, and a review will be brought back, I think, to the November meeting of the Scrutiny Board. The chair's indicated that he'd be happy to invite guests to that board from this committee. Item 84 in relation to internal audit, members requested further information on COVID grant fraud, and that information has been circulated to the current members of the committee, and there's been some follow-up from that. I believe our external audit colleagues are in a position to update on the position in relation to the external audit.
Should we do that now? If you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think the briefing note that Mary produced the other day is quite a helpful summary of where things are in terms of the external audit process. So we have been informed by the finance team that the outstanding information that we're required to conclude the audit has now been submitted to us, and we'll be commencing that work from next week. We have a plan in terms of a team to focus on completion of the 2021 accounts from next week onwards, and then a separate team will be involved in planning the 21-22 audit work with a view to concluding both last year's outstanding work and fully planning up the 21-22 audit by the end of July. There is an additional national issue that is ongoing at the moment, which again Mary's paper sets out in terms of accounting for infrastructure. The expectation is that SIPFA are likely to finalise their position on accounting for infrastructure assets towards the end of July/August. So at the minute, no external auditor is signing off old year accounts until that's resolved. On the basis that it is resolved in August and we've completed all our work in the other areas by the end of July, the view would be that we provide an updated ISA 260 report to this committee in September and sign off the old year accounts in September. In addition to that, the VFM work is planned to conclude in September as well, and also the audit plan for 21-22 will come to this committee in September, with a view for that audit being concluded in time for the February audit committee. And then I think the other point to mention on Mary's paper is our audit regulator, the FRC, has selected the 1920 audit file for inspection. So that's currently ongoing. And on conclusion of that, Victoria as Section 151 officer and yourself as chair, you'll get a report from the FRC on their findings. So that again should be all concluded by September. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you very much for that. And if I can ask the clerk to make a note of that note that was sent around members, just for the record, just so that obviously it's on public record what was actually sent to members. And also, just as a matter of point, there's a lot of people in here with a lot of financial background who like acronyms. This is a public meeting. If I could ask, please, you do not use acronyms where possible, because it's so that the public has, and actually to the newer members on here, have a slight understanding what some of those acronyms mean, if you don't mind. Do members have any matters arising or questions off the back of that? No, perfect. Where am I now? Item number 8, internal audit report. I'm handing over to, I believe, Jonathan Foster.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, I'm here to present our update report looking at March to May this year. So I'm going to give a bit of background and a bit of a tour through the report. So apologies to established members of the committee who've heard that before. But I think this will be helpful for the newer members of the committee just to get a bit of a flavour of what we've done and why. So internal audit is a section. We sit independently in the organisation. By that, I mean we don't have any operational responsibility for the delivery of services. And that enables us to review across the whole authority really independently around systems and processes, so we can give that assurance around how things are working without that being conflicted by operational responsibility there. And we carry out a lot of work over the course of the year, which is detailed in our audit plan, which was approved by this committee in March this year. So this particular update, if you look at Appendix A, which is where most of the detail is contained around the work that we've done, Section 4 tends to be the area of, I guess, some of the most interesting information for members each time. So this is a summary of the reports that we've issued during the period. So you'll see there we've issued 11 reports during this particular period, and we tend to draw attention where there are areas for improvement, if you like. So you'll see on the primary school audit where we've given a limited opinion in the report, we've also given a bit of explanation around the improvements that can be made to the financial control environment there. And reassuringly, we can say that they're already on with some of those as well. So we like to focus on those areas so that members' attention is drawn to the areas of improvement. Similarly, with follow-up reviews, so where we found an issue in the past, and there's a couple of those this time, we like to give a flavour of what's happened since, so that members can again get that feel for the continual improvement within the control environment and take reassurance around that where we've identified issues at one point in time, we will follow that up and then come back with more assurance later down the line. So that's the table of reports issued where we've given a control opinion or issued a memo where it doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. And if you like, that's the more traditional audit work where we're involved in a service, we review what's happening, and then we report on it. There's another big table underneath there called other audit work. So that tends to focus on the areas where we're actively involved in things that are ongoing at a point in time. So there might be projects and programs happening across the council, project boards, that kind of things, or individual discrete things that are going on where it doesn't necessarily make sense for us to go in after the events and see what's happened. It's much more value adding for us to be involved live during the event so that we can advise as we go. Where there are lessons to learn during, we can have oversight of that, and we can impart our advice around risk management controls during the process and build that in rather than after the event. So there's some really valuable work there that again contributes towards our annual opinion at the end of the year. Section 10 looks at our performance. So that involves one of the key measures, which is the satisfaction surveys that we issue at the end of each audit report. And established members of the committee will know that this is an area that often comes under scrutiny, and great value is placed on this as a means for assessing our performance as we go. I would like to say in this period, the responses that we've got are particularly high, much higher than I've known in the past, which is great. And I do think that reflects really well on us as a service. I am confident that that is an independent and objective measure of our performance. And in the past, where we have had some of the lower scores, we have drawn that to the attention of the committee and highlighted where there are areas to improve. And we welcome that as well, because we want to improve as we go. The response rate during this period is 70%, which is quite good for us. It's still some area for improvement there. There is a time lag sometimes with responses coming back, which I think comes across in the graph. And where the schools, for example, have dropped off a little bit in the response rate, I am aware that I think 2 or 3 of those have actually come through since the close of the reporting period. So in actual fact, that response rate is higher than it comes across there. It's simply the period cut off that doesn't reflect that. So finally, in the internal audit report, there's our quality assurance improvement programme. So that gives a feel for the range of work that we've done over the course of the year to improve our practices as we go. So we continually identify areas where we can enhance what we do, and then we try and track that so we see how we're doing against that. And one of the key areas on there, which you'll see as complete, is recommendation tracking, which we've now rolled out across the authority. And we hope to be in a position to start bringing data on that to the committee in the annual report, which will come to you later in the year. So that's the completion of the internal audit report. There's also some appended information around the monitoring of urgent decisions, which members have asked for in the past. So any questions, I'll do my best to try and answer. Thank you.
So open the floor up to members. Any questions? Councillor Triswell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. On page 23, there is reference to payments for domiciliary support, home care to users of mental health service. And I just wondered if you could elaborate on why this was a particular issue for that particular group of service users as opposed to across the board. Do you want me to, I've got 3 questions.
If they're all relatively short and straightforward.
Yeah. Okay, page 26, there is reference to the £150 energy bill support scheme. And I don't know about other colleagues, but I've had quite a lot of people contacting me about significant delays in those payments. And I just wonder if we can have a little bit more information as to why that's been the case and how far we're able to streamline those payments. And my final question relates to page 30, on which there's a table indicating actual and planned days of audit activity. And I was just drawn to the fact that the amount of time spent on anti-fraud and corruption was above both the agreed and revised plan days by quite a substantial amount. And I assume there's obviously had to be concomitant reductions in audit carried out in other areas such as financial, directorate risks, etc. And I'm just wondering why there was that sudden extra 100 days required that weren't planned for anti-fraud and corruption. I can guess what the answer might be, but I just want confirmation of that, please, Chair.
If you want to take those ones first, then I'll go for a next round of questions.
I'll take a couple of those myself first off, Councillor Trustwell. So first of all, on the payments to the mental health services home care. So I'm not aware of the full details on this one, as it's not an audit that I was involved in directly, but I am aware that in that particular area, there's been some significant staffing and structuring changes, which I think have held up some of the progress in that area. So there's been kind of activities that have tried to implement ongoing around, say, service level agreements and the agreement of rates for those particular charges in the absence of a formal contract. But I think with the accumulation of staffing and structuring changes and the pandemic and things like that, it's delayed the progress a little bit further than they would have liked around the actual formal contract. and that relates specifically to that area rather than some of the other areas of social care. So as I'm aware, that is the explanation around that part of it. Then on the actual versus planned dates in the fraud area. Now, I think one of the primary reasons for that, which you'd probably guess, is around the additional work that's been required around the COVID grants and things like that, which was kind of unforecast at the start of the year, but has taken some more of that fraud time. And I am also aware of the apportionment of time that we've been ongoing with quite a big piece of work on employee outside interests. So we've badged that as a proactive fraud piece of work, which it does contribute obviously to the control environment there, and it's come from that time allocation. But in essence, really, that contributes to assurances across a number of areas. So it's a bigger job than we anticipated. The time is reflected in that area of the budget, but the assurances we get will be distributed, if you like, across other areas of the plan. So that in essence is why that area in particular is higher than forecast. On the issue of the energy bill support scheme, I believe Victoria would like to add something on that.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the energy support scheme, I've got an update. We have 320,000 households that were eligible for the payment in bands A to D. What we have done is all those who pay by direct debit have now had their payment. All those that have applied through the application form online, we have to do a number of checks to make sure that there's no fraudulent claims. We had a number of those applications that were flagged by the Spotlight system. So what we had to do is to go through those flags and to identify how we could mitigate that to make the payments. On some of them, we've made the back payments because we've been able to do that because we've confirmed that the person who who's on the application form is on the liability for the council tax. So sometimes you have more than one person on there. We had some others that we've issued post office vouchers for because we couldn't confirm the bank details weren't fraudulent, but we'd sent the post office voucher to the household. And we're progressing those at the moment. We have got a number, around 80,000 who haven't applied, who are eligible. So we did a social media out to try and encourage everybody to apply. And then what we've done is we've said on the 24th, which is today, is the last day for people to apply for that payment. What we are then going to do is process those who've applied and either do the backs payments for those where we can. It's not flagged on the Spotlight system. Where it's flagged, we'd pay them with a post office voucher. And then we will run a report and compare it against all those who are eligible for the £150 payment. Once we've confirmed who's actually had the payment and who hasn't, we will then credit their council tax account for the £150, and then we will reissue the council tax bills. As you can appreciate, this is no mean feat, and the team that are dealing with it they're not a team for making payments. The revenues team are collecting income, so it's on over and above their normal work, but they've worked extremely hard to get this resolved as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Any quick follow-up questions, Councillor Truswell?
Yeah, I'd just like to come back very quickly. In terms of administering this incredible, it's a bit like the COVID grants, we keep getting these burdens dumped on us. Was there any kind of management fee built into the funding made available by the government? And could you just elaborate on this Spotlight system? There's lots of references to it, and I suppose I should have Googled it, but if you could just tell us what that is. And my other point is going back to the issue of the payments for domiciliary support to people with mental health issues. It says that control weaknesses remain. Presumably that will be monitored until that situation is resolved.
I'll come back on the £150 if that's okay. We did receive new burdens funding for administrating this, which does help, but it's obviously we need trained staff who are used to using the systems. So it's been about people working, part-time staff working full-time and asking people to do overtime that's enabled us to do this. The Spotlight system is a government system that we use, and it checks a number of different things, which obviously I don't want to say what it checks, but it goes through, one of the things is checking the bank accounts details are valid, but it does a number of other checks as well, and then if it fails it will red flag and will send us, we have a report of those that we have to do further checks on. Okay, but it's a government system. I don't know if Louise, is there anything else to add on that?
Yeah, no, it's a government-run system through the Cabinet Office, and it checks the bank account details. And as Victoria said, it red flags where there's been a mismatch in the data that's received. Okay.
And just going back to the mental health services, you'll recall I mentioned recommendation tracking. So through that process now, each time we issue a recommendation, that is then followed up by the service area. So it goes onto a tracker. We require services to provide an update to that. And information will then come through to the committee around the implementation of those recommendations. So by default, it stays on our radar there. But for some extra reassurance there as well, we also have a programme of contract reviews. So once that contract is up and running, because of some of the issues there, it immediately goes onto our radar in our risk assessment for potential contract review work. So it will be a consideration for that, as well as you'll see on there the wider CIS payments, so payments to providers of social care services. We do have a route in to potentially follow it up through that as well. So there are a number of mechanisms there through which that stays on our radar. And we will come back to the committee with more information as the control environment progresses there.
Thank you for that, and welcome Councillor Almas, who I know was stuck in traffic, so welcome to today's meeting. Councillor Flynn, I believe you had a question.
Thanks, Paul, and forgive me if these have all been answered in previous years or whatever. I think I know the answer to the first one, but I'll ask all three together, yeah? Okay, the first one is complementary to Paul's on page 23, the mental health contracts, home care. Page 26, which is the budget review group, and page 27, the transformation programme. There's a sort of a link between the last two, but a bit of an eye-opener that there was no framework contract in place. My understanding is there have been a number of significant changes in home care provision over the last, well, since I was on Adults and Health Scrutiny Board, God knows how long ago, with Paul, actually. And I find it quite surprising that there's no framework contract in place. And even worse, no documentation to support the selection of providers and rates. I assume you're just looking at the financial sort of side of this, the audit side of it. What I'm concerned about is the level of care that's going to be provided to the people concerned. If we're not watching the contracts and award of contracts and the suppliers or providers, how do we know that the service provided is at least as good as the required standard? Second one is the budget review group. The budget review group with specific reference to adults and health. As Victoria will know, I've got a particular interest in this. Why, first of all, just adults and health? Because every directorate has got budget action plans. Do you look at the veracity of strategic reviews as against business as usual? Because it certainly doesn't seem to go under the auspices of the scrutiny board I'm on. And I would query whether some of the business as usual projects were actually BAU, or whether there should be strategic reviews. And you know the reason why I'm asking that question. And finally, the transformation programme. Is this just the digital transformation programme you're talking about, or are we talking about the transformation of the care within adults and health?
I'll try and answer what I can there, Councillor, but I must stress that the adults and health area is not an area where I have portfolio responsibility in internal audit, so I don't know all of the detail there. However, just going back to the contract first off, so we tend not to solely focus on the financial part of it. Obviously, the financial side of it is very auditable in terms of the rates, but we do look wider than that around how contracts or arrangements that should lend themselves to contracts are managed from a quality assurance perspective. So we don't neglect the side of it around how we get assurance over what it's delivered, as well as the price that it's been delivered at. And where we've said around the absence of documentation, that might be perhaps misrepresentative wording, because again, I am aware that it's not a case of no documentation to support the rates. It's a case of perhaps inconsistent documentation, and in some cases a lack of retention of that documentation. So we're not suggesting that the rates haven't been agreed and that the level of service and the care that comes through the care plan hasn't been agreed. It's more that the information that you would normally be contractually bound to, I feel, that would tie that together has not always been there in that period. So it makes it difficult for us to give the more substantial assurances in that area. On the other areas, I do feel that may be something where it may be helpful for us to provide some information outside of the committee to yourself with a more detailed response than I would be able to provide today, unless anybody else has anything they would like to add on that at this point.
Someone else going to speak? Any follow-up questions? Oh, yes. Sorry, someone else going to answer something there. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I know you mentioned the transformation program. I was kind of bringing that within as well, so that if we give a more thorough response on the budget review group and the transformation program, I feel that would be more value adding to the committee than the information I would be in a position to provide today, if I'm honest.
Yeah, follow-up question, yeah.
Red light. Yeah, thanks very much. I'd assumed as much. I mean, you're obviously on an entirely separate sort of plane from the people providing the care. But I mean, your answer on the no minimal documentation, I know where you're coming from. The simple fact of the matter is there isn't any there, and therefore you can't provide assurances because it's not there. On the second point, where was I on the budget action plans? Do you have anything to do at all with the veracity of them, whether they should be one or the other on any of the directorates that you're looking at? I mean, this specifically is adults and health, and it just seems strange you're looking at that one and not all of the other groups or the other directorates.
Sorry, can I answer that one, please? Sorry, I'm Louise Booth, Head of Audit. We have actually had a programme of work. We are looking at all the directorates, but during this programme of work, we're actually looking at the arrangements in place, not actually at what they're looking at. So it's more around the controls, how the processes are being established, rather than actually the content within those programmes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, these are fairly key to budget setting, you know, the midterm financial review and all the rest of it. It's just that I have a lot of concerns about strategic reviews and business as usual. And I'm still not clear really on what you were looking for specifically in adults and health rather than anywhere else.
Could I bring in Victoria, who I think wants to add to this?
Yeah, thank you. The budget action plans are part, as you've said, is the budget setting process, and we monitor those throughout the year, and they're reported to Executive Board on a monthly basis. They then go to each of the scrutiny panels who review and scrutinise the achievement of those budget action plans. As Louise has explained, this committee is around the controls, the governance, the decision making, not around the actual proposals that are in there. Okay, so it's through Executive Board and scrutiny. All right, thank you.
Anybody else want to add to that before I move on to Councillor Illingworth? No, Councillor Illingworth?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I want to return to a matter which I raised last year on internal audit, and particularly focus on the independent nature of the inquiry which takes place. And although we're obviously mainly focused on money, it's not the only consideration for auditors. Feasibility, efficiency, value for money, unintended consequences also are things which you may legitimately raise. And it may require a technical appraisal of the draft proposals. That's the issue which I tried to raise last year, that we were not really staffed and equipped to deal with technical issues relating to a project. We could only, well, we were good at money, but not necessarily the other
Sorry to
aspects.
interject, John. Is this turning into a question rather than a comment, please? Then please frame it into a question if you don't mind for the officers.
Should we refer to scrutiny? And we did that with Paul's committee about a week ago, 10 days ago. And I think it's fair to say it's not going to lead to any further action. So from my point of view, it wasn't a success. Well, my question is, what do I do next? I'm still not satisfied with the outcome. I don't think we've had that independent look that we should have had. There's an element of people marking their own homework in the way that the council's procedures work. And so I'm flagging it up on the issue of independence and being slightly further back from the issue than the people who've done the design work, and said, is this right? And what does a member do next when they're not satisfied with the outcome?
I'll be honest, Councillor Ringcliffe, I don't think this is a question for this committee. I think that's a question that will raise to the appropriate exec board member and the appropriate chief officer in the planning section. I don't think that's really, sorry, John, that is a specific planning related query you've effectively raised. It's not really something for governance and audit in this forum. So are there any other questions from any other councillors before we move on? Yeah.
Customer satisfaction questionnaires. 4 out of 13 were just not replied to. We didn't get an answer at all. And I'd like to know which directorates they were from, please, and what we do about that. And how long do they have? And what do we do with customer satisfaction questionnaires? Do they actually affect policy? The first question is, who doesn't? Who ignores you?
The ones that haven't been replied to as yet, Councillor Howard, we don't know for sure that they won't be replied to. Or as I say, for example, in the graph you'll see there with schools and academies, the table says we issued 6, we got 1 back. I am aware that since the period closed, we've had another few back. But this particular report looks at a specific period of time, so it's outside of that. In terms of satisfaction scores in general, or the questionnaires in general, we're continually looking at ways to try and generate more and more feedback through this. Now, I know we are still falling short at the moment with, I think it's 69% in this particular period. We try to follow those up where we can, and there probably are opportunities for us to strengthen that process to try and increase that response rate further. But we've seen an upwards climb in it over the course of a reasonable amount of time here. That I do accept there are areas where we can still improve on that, but the response rate is something that is constantly on our radar to try and pick up. We don't impose a particular time scale at the moment for it to come back, hence why there can sometimes be the time lag.
Follow up, I believe. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. If you want to before. Yeah.
Sorry, can I also add, sorry, that due to feedback from one of our auditors, they've actually suggested that we actually introduce the fact that we're going to issue a quality questionnaire at the end of the process as part of the terms of reference. So we're actually going to be teeing up the officers in the directorates beforehand and then remind them again in the report. So we are trying to think of ways to actually improve the response as well.
Well, if that's going to be policy, fine. Let's tell us when it's going to begin, please. I'd like to know who, at the next meeting, who is not yet replied. And also the point about, they give them a month to reply. Auditees say a month from now we should report to the Governance and Audit Committee who have not yet replied.
Can I like suggest, rather than putting that onto the next meeting, if we can just have a briefing note sent out and then we can make a note of it in the minute, because if it's just for factual information sake, it isn't. Yeah. Any other questions from anyone? Yep.
Thank you. Quite a few of my questions have already been asked, so I'll be and I've got 2 that I'm going to lump together as one, if that's all right. It relates to, I'm pleased to hear that you're going to report back to Audit Committee on actions. You've got your action tracker in place, and you'll be reporting that back to Audit Committee, I think you said in your annual report. Linked to that, is a question around how you talk about follow-up and following up previous limited or no assurance reports. Do you have a set time frame on when you do that follow-up? Do you agree that you will follow up no later than 12 months after the issue of the initial report, for example? And as I say, two questions linked together. So that's part one. And then part two is, are you seeing or do you see any problems in the implementation of actions, which links very much to follow-up? And do you come across having to roll actions forward? Is that something that you would propose to bring back through the form of a dashboard to audit committee? Thank you.
Okay, so on that, with the recommendation tracking in general, so this is it's quite a new process for us. So I'm just going to try and describe how we've made this work, and hopefully that will be helpful to you in terms of the information that you will then start to see coming back. So every time we issue a report, obviously there are recommendations in there. The high and medium priority ones in particular, so the ones with the big impact are the ones which go onto the tracker. We are then sending reminders out across directorates for them to have the ownership over completing that. And then very much, as you say, we plan to come back to committee first of all in the annual report, and then regularly through the update reports with some dashboard information that shows whether things have been implemented in line with the target timescale that we agreed in the report. And obviously where that hasn't happened, that will give the committee the chance to zero in on the areas where there are particular improvements. On the follow-up audit process in general, which remains in place, obviously for the limited and the no assurance ones, where there are obviously more significant issues to pick up that would require a follow-up audit and not just the action tracking element of it. We have tried in the past to say that we will do so within 6 months. That doesn't always work and doesn't always lend itself to the area, because it can depend upon the nature of the issue itself and any structural change that is going on there. And we try to go in there at the right time to be able to genuinely see and affect the differences that have been made and the improvements to the control environment. What we will normally try to do is agree that at the point that we issue the report and agree a timescale where possible, and then it stays on our radar and we stay in touch with the service to schedule that in. Again, with something like that, we're always looking at the best ways of doing things. And I guess the most robust way of doing that. So if members have a particular view on a time frame, we would listen to that, obviously. But generally speaking, it tends to be a judgment call on the individual audit area, and we will agree that at the point the report is issued around when we go back.
Can I also interject on that? Sorry. Obviously, we're now also showing members where audits are delayed or swapped in and out. So obviously these follow-ups would be planned, and if there's any change to that plan, that would be highlighted through the reporting process as well.
Any follow-ups? Yeah.
I do have a separate question if that's all right. Thank you for those responses, they were helpful. Totally separate. Someone mentioned independence before, and I think it's great to see that you've got a whole host of other work in addition to what you do in your audit plan. I really do think I welcome that. My question is around how you demonstrate to yourselves and then to us ultimately that you are retaining your independence, where you're going in, in live and offering advice. There's quite a lot of references to providing advice, which is good. I'm not saying that's wrong at all, but just to give yourselves and ourselves comfort that where you are providing such advice, when you go and provide assurance later on, you're not marking your own homework in that respect.
First and foremost, we are there for advice, and at no point are we a decision maker, and that is made clear in the terms of reference for any board that we're members of. So we can give you a list of the boards we're on and the copies of the terms of reference if that's needed, but we do stipulate right from the start. We've also had the PS, well, the SIAS, as I call it. That is the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards Audit. It's where we are audited ourselves, and that happens every 5 years. We've recently, I say recently, it was Christmas time, and we passed our external assessment with flying colours, and so that obviously confirmed independence as well.
Any follow-ups? Any other questions from members. Councillor Trustwell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's a comment followed by a question which I think we need to ask as a committee. And it's about resources that are devoted to audit. Now, clearly, no one on the doorstep is ever going to say to us as politicians, I'll only vote for you if you spend more money on audit. But on the other hand, it's quite important because clearly audit is about value for money. It's about combating fraud. It's about greater efficiency, about streamlining things. And each year, and Linda referred to this, we have an annual audit report, which gives us an idea of what's going to be audited during the course of a year. Now, going back to my previous question about the amount of time actually spent in various areas of audit, I've no problem with extra money being spent on looking at fraud. But what that does mean is that there is less auditor time to be spent on some of the other components of that annual plan. And I'm just wondering how far those changes in focus have change the annual audit plan and those things that we as a committee were told were going to be covered over the course of the year. In other words, I suppose in shorthand, what isn't being done at all or to the extent that was originally contained in the plan?
Thank you for that question. Any changes to the plan do come through the audit committee and get reported to you throughout the year. What I would say is that obviously we've gone through an unprecedented time that has heavily influenced the way we've done our auditing and what we've audited, fraud being a significant part of that, and obviously other types of response to COVID. Also, we're undertaking service review as a service like the rest of the council. So we are going through a process of assessing the resources and the type of auditors and the type of audit work we do. The council is actually going through a significant period of transformation. So we're looking at whether we are fit for a service now, and not only now, but in the next 5-10 years. So I'm currently working through that with Victoria at the minute, and any proposals will be coming to committee.
Follow up before I move on? No, thank you. So I'm going to move because we've got some other agenda items. So just in terms of the recommendation, does the committee agree the recommendation set out in the paper to A, receive the internal audit update report covering the period from March to May 2022 and note the work undertaken by the internal audit during the period covered by the report? B, note that there have been no limits in scope and nothing has arisen to compromise the independence of the internal audit during the reporting period. And C, receive the report providing information related to the monitoring of urgent decisions covering the period of March to May 2022. So quick show of hands if we accept that. Any don't? Any abstentions? There we go. Moving on. Item agenda number 9 then, please. And I believe Louise is presenting this one.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the counter-fraud activities undertaken over the period October to March as part of the counter-fraud and corruption assurance block within the audit plan. The report is in 2 main sections: the reactive work undertaken to investigate concerns raised by staff, members of the public, and also the proactive work to review the controls in place to prevent fraud from occurring. This also includes time to raise awareness of new and emerging fraud risks and promote counter-fraud training. So looking at the reactive section of the report, paragraph 5 highlights the method staff and members of the public can get in touch with the council to raise their concerns about wrongdoing. The table illustrates referrals received between October and March, split by directorate and referral type. In total, 23 referrals were received in this period. Paragraph 8 highlights that as at the end of March, 21 referrals were being investigated. Investigations are undertaken either by internal audit, human resources, staff within directorates, or a combination of these. In all cases, internal audit undertake a risk assessment upon receipt of the referral and determine the most appropriate investigative route. Paragraph 9 of the report shows referrals that were closed in the period by directorate, referral type, and the outcomes. The next section of the report goes through the proactive anti-fraud work. The National Fraud Initiative is an exercise conducted by the Cabinet Office every 2 years that matches electronic data within and between public and private sector bodies to prevent and detect fraud and error. Relevant teams within the Council, for example, internal audit, benefits, housing and tenancy fraud, have been working through the matches on a risk basis. The majority of the matches have now been closed. 19 errors have been identified, resulting in the recovery of around £35,000. We continue to undertake work on the COVID business grants. A separate paper has been produced and circulated to members. A review of the controls within the direct payment audit team has also been undertaken, which found that the fraud prevention and detection controls were robust and operating well in practice. Part of our role is to ensure that staff are made aware of fraud risks and know where to raise concerns. We promoted these during International Fraud Awareness Week in November via the Insight page, where we updated the Tackling Fraud and Corruption Toolkit and included the revised whistleblowing policy and counter-fraud and corruption strategy. Our counter-fraud training package has been uploaded to the performance and learning system for staff to complete. This was communicated through the Best Council leadership team and the manager communications email. So far, 240 people have undertaken the training. We will undertake targeted communications to key staff groups to promote the training further. Part of our role is also to undertake a refresh of the corporate counter-fraud policies, and we are currently reviewing the anti-money laundering policy, which should be complete in time for the next counter-fraud update to the committee. The last section of the report confirms that there have been no applications for directed surveillance or covert human intelligence source authorisations in the period. Thank you. And are there any questions?
Any questions from members? Councillor Flint.
Thank you. On page 47, I can understand why most of the referral types are in there, but the safeguarding one under children and families, a bit of a puzzle. Could you give us, I know you can't give us any confidential information, but could you give us a bit more?
Yeah, our reporting lines are such that people can email, telephone us with any concerns that they have at all. So we are kind of a conduit to pass information on to other directorates. So in the case of the safeguarding referral, that's something that we would receive their concerns. It may be that they didn't know where they should be reporting that to. So then we obviously know the right people to contact and pass those concerns on. It could be also that the safeguarding concerns were wrapped up in other kind of allegations, but we receive all the concerns and make sure they're directed to the correct people.
Yeah, I presumably the decision then, the not proven, is from Children's Directorate, not from you. Yeah.
Yes, we receive information from other directorates. So we get either an investigation report or some kind of confirmation that they've undertaken an investigation and the outcomes of that, just so that we can read it and compare it to the allegations that have been received, just to give some additional assurance that everything's been captured and looked into.
Yes, thank you, Chair. 3 questions. On page 46 is a table relating to reactive anti-fraud work. I may have missed it, but how many of those referrals came from the public and how many came from staff members? On page 49, there's reference to the direct payment review and the 4.9 million being lost nationally. Has there been any fraud detected in Leeds itself? And my final question relates to the use of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and the fact that we don't seem to make much use of it, whereas I think in some local authorities, it's used for a whole gamut of investigations, such as benefit fraud, environmental crime. I mean, is there a presumption in Leeds that we don't use it and that there are other approaches that don't require this particular piece of legislation?
Thank you, Councillor. Regarding your first question regarding those that were received from members of the public and staff, I haven't split that analysis down in this report, but if you find it helpful for me to do so in the future, that's something that I can do. Regarding the fraud in direct payments, that's not some information that I have to hand at this point in time, but what we're hoping to do as part of future developments of this report is to bring in areas from other areas of fraud within the council, such as housing tenancy, direct payments, so that you have more assurance regarding the different types of fraud experienced within the council. So not just from internal audit's point of view and referrals received through the whistleblowing route, we're hoping to develop this report so that it represents more corporately the fraud that is occurring. And regarding your final query, I'm afraid that's not something I can answer. I'm not sure. It's for each different directorate when they're undertaking investigations, how they go about that in terms of whether they make use of the legal powers. But yeah, I'm not sure if anybody from legal can advise on that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. That is something on behalf of Legal Services that I can look into for you.
Any follow-up questions, Councillor Truswell? No, Councillor Amos.
Thanks, Chair. Going to page 47, non-compliance with policies and procedures. We've got 3 not proven cases there. My question would be around the referrals. Where were the referrals made from? Were they internal referrals or external? And also, if that's the case, because 3 cases, obviously, if it's not proven, then do they not? Is there not some sort of cry out for more training with regards to compliance and policies and procedures in certain, in certain areas? Thank you.
Yep, again, I haven't split this table down to where we receive the referrals. So if it's helpful in the future, I can split that in terms of whether that's come from a member of the public or a member of staff. In terms of cases that are not proven, in all cases where we undertake investigations, we produce a report at the closure of the investigation, which will highlight opportunities for the service for improvement. So that is something that gets issued at the end of every investigation.
Any follow-up questions? Yeah, Councillor Harron.
National Fraud Initiative, recovery of £35,000. Where does that money go?
The recovery at the moment, most of the cases are from council tax reduction and the housing benefits. So that is income that is coming back to us from ongoing payments. So it's all to do with the benefit service. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Just a quick one. Relating to your comparative trends year on year, I think it's paragraph 8 on my papers. Do you also compare to other councils how you, I guess it links back to the effectiveness of your fraud awareness raising, really. Do you measure that effectiveness by comparing and benchmarking to other councils? How well, it sounds bad when you say how well you're doing about the number of cases that you have reported, but the effectiveness of your fraud awareness raising, is that measured through comparing numbers with other councils, if that makes sense?
Yeah, we don't currently undertake that analysis, and I think part of the reason for that is because of the way different councils are structured with their corporate. A lot of councils have corporate fraud teams, whereas within Leeds City Council we have internal audit who are responsible for kind of corporate oversight, but we also have teams within housing, the blue badge team, benefits. So it's more split up throughout the council rather than it being in one team.
And that's something that we'll be looking at as part of the service review.
Follow-ups? Any other questions? Okay, so where am I now? I've lost where I am. Does the committee agree with the recommendation set out in the report? Quick show of hands. Everyone happy with that? Yeah. Any abstentions? Any no's? There we go. Straightforward. That's what we like. So item agenda number 10. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Chair. And again, with apologies to those who've been on the committee for some time and have been through the decision-making cycle of internal control a number of times I'm going to go in a little bit more depth for those who are new to the committee. The decision-making framework runs throughout the council's arrangements to give effect to the principles and commitments of the local code of corporate governance. In particular, it's very relevant to openness and stakeholder engagement, to proportionate and sustainable and realistic decision-making, and to developing capacity. So this report provides a significant source of assurance to the committee, underlying your understanding of the internal control environment when it comes to considering the annual governance statement, which will be coming in its interim form to the next meeting of this committee. The appendix to the report follows the cycle of internal control. So the first stage of the cycle is define and document, and members will see that there are a considerable raft of rules, protocols, formal responsibilities relating to decision making. There are no significant changes this year from the arrangements in place last year, and there's nothing to highlight from that point of view within the report. The next stage of the cycle is to look at, clearly communicate how well have arrangements been articulated and shared with those who need to be carrying out those systems. So it looks at leadership, advice and guidance, and training. The main development this year on that front is the reintroduction of officer training, which ceased when we couldn't deliver it face-to-face in the first year of COVID. So we've delivered training remotely to 330 officers, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, albeit perhaps reluctantly so, because it is a dry subject, and we recognise that. Whilst officers recognise that remote delivery is okay in the circumstances, there is an indication that they would prefer a return to face-to-face, and we will be looking at that, and we'll also be fully assessing the feedback that we've got as we consider and develop the offer for leaders and managers, and for all those who are involved in decision making and needing to understand council structures and how they work at any level. The third step in the cycle is effectively embed. And again, we've made no changes this year to the arrangements in place to mean that officers can fulfil the requirements of the decision-making framework. We do at this point show you within the report how many decisions have been published. There are a few fewer than in previous years, and I think that in part that's the COVID effect. There was a bump up in the number of decisions that we had to take around payment out of COVID grants, around closing premises. There were all sorts of things that we were taking decisions about. There's also a big shift in the number of decisions made between the Directorate of Resources and the Directorate of Communities, Housing and Environment. And that's the realignment of the housing function from one to the other, and simply the shift of decisions that go with that. After effectively embed, we look at meaningfully monitor. So this is the bit where those with specialist oversight and control are looking at whether the system is working. We have a number of established performance indicators, and we were performing fabulously against those before COVID, to the point where we asked members to actually up the performance indicator, and then obviously didn't meet it even closely in the first year of COVID. Those performance levels are coming back up. They're very nearly there. They're just not quite there yet in terms of publication to the list of forthcoming key decisions. So that's the bit about giving a month's notice before decisions are taken, and availability for call-in, so that members have that opportunity to question whether the information contained covers all aspects of the decision. It looks, in the most part, that that's driven by the financial challenge, and those decisions that are taken under urgency procedures are the ones where we're getting grant money in and we have to sign on the dotted line, or they won't let us have it, that sort of information. The recommendation is that the performance indicators are left where they are for the time being, and we continue to strive to meet them. But at the same time, we'll look to doing a review over the coming year, a bit of benchmarking with other authorities to see what they do to see whether our approach remains reasonable, especially in relation to the receipt of income, not so much the spending it, but the getting it in, and whether the framework is getting in the way of bringing money into the authority. Which brings me into the review and refine area of the cycle. We've developed sample testing of decisions taken by officers. We're in the very early stages of this. We've done a couple of months of the cycle, but making sure that all the things that we expect to see in a decision report are there in the right way. We need to look at how we deliver on that. But I think it will be helpful assurance to committee in the fullness of time. As I've said, we're going to look at some benchmarking as well. And finally, we need to fully review the feedback that came in the survey of internal control to look at the responses that came there. But members will see that there were two themes that arose. One is that balance of robustness of framework versus agility of being able to take the decisions that we need to be able to take when we need to be able to take them, and the availability of advice and guidance, and making sure that we're working proactively with colleagues out in the directorates to help them navigate the system in the neatest way. So again, it doesn't get in the way of the decisions. Any questions?
Any questions? That's called a comprehensive, but none. Love it. Okay, so straight on to the recommendation then. Does the committee agree that the recommendation set out in the report to consider and note the positive assurance set out in the decision-making statement of internal control attached Appendix A of this report? We all happy with that? There we go, straightforward. There you go. Lightning speed. Love it. Item number 11. I believe Simon is doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The paper sets out proposed, and I guess you'd call them developing governance arrangements for the best city ambition. And for governance purposes, the best city ambition replaces the best council plan, though it's much more of a far more explicitly partner-oriented strategy than perhaps the best council plan. And the adoption of the best city ambition triggered a whole range of activity looking at underpinning strategies and partnerships and activity that we're doing. So we're seeing 2022-23 as a transitional year in moving from the kind of existing legacy of arrangements and performance frameworks, etc., that underpin the best city ambition, to move to a refreshed, revised approach that fully reflects, sorry, I'm getting my best city ambition and best council plan mixed up here, which reflected the best council plan moving to one that reflects the best city ambition. So the annex works through these kind of, hopefully in a logical manner, and we've adopted the cycle of internal control framework to frame them. It covers quite a lot of ground, but we were keen to share all of what we were doing. So I'll go through it, but I'll just focus in on some of the key aspects, because some of it I think is relatively straightforward. So in terms of define and document, the first thing we do is we kind of represent and set out the context for the transition to the best city ambition and the drivers of it. So you will recall that on the back of the experience, particularly from COVID and the intense partnership working, we thought it was a really good opportune moment to think about refreshing the city ambition. So where we've got to it, city ambition sets out a revised, perhaps slightly more minimalist headline ambition for the city, re-emphasising the focus on poverty and inequality, but grounded on the three pillars of inclusive growth, health and well-being, and zero carbon, but also strengthens the partnership foundation and infrastructure that underpins it. So that's the first thing it does. The paper then sets out under strategic framework current activity looking to refine and refresh the strategies and plans that underpin the best city ambition. So we as part of the development of the ambition, we mapped the strategies and plans in the city and we stopped counting, we got to 108. So there's a lot of interrelated plans and activity, which we believe are ripe for review and streamlining to promote linkages between them, to avoid duplication, and to also help a third party navigate what we're trying to do as a city. So we're in the middle of that, but we hope to end up with a much clearer, more streamlined strategic infrastructure that underpins the ambition. I guess in parallel to that, we're looking at the partnership infrastructure and arrangements in the city. We avoided establishing some sort of overarching single partnership for the best city ambition. We thought we should work with what we've got. But having said that, there's always opportunities to think about how we can better join partnerships up and agendas up. And we think there's going to be a rolling basis for both these pieces of work. So when a strategy is up for review, we can take the opportunity to look at it, to think about how does it fit in this revised ambition, rather than trying to do them all at once. Moving on, partnership arrangements, I've done that. So in terms of roles and responsibilities, hopefully self-explanatory, setting out the key elements, the roles and responsibilities in terms of reporting and accountability. Clearly communicate. So this sets out our current methods of communication, some of the key elements there. The leadership arrangements in terms of the role of executive members and the council leadership and officer leadership. But also, I think the importance of continuing engagement and explanation of what we're trying to achieve, both with staff, but also with partners. So we're doing a lot of work with staff to try and embed the understanding of the refreshed ambition. Under effectively embed, again, sets out some of the practicalities of decision making. In terms of working with communities, I think what we've got there is, it refers to the progress and the early work with communities particularly regarding, I guess, local implementation and planning around the best city ambition, making it much more of a reality at a local level. And there's a lot of work going on with colleagues in the communities teams about how we actually do that, working in communities. And then finally, there's the element around values and behaviours, and again, strong partnership engagement being a vital component there. And then meaningfully monitor. So as I said, we've seen 2022-23 as a transitional year where we move from the current performance arrangement to revised performance arrangements that better reflect the best city ambition. So we're currently working on what that revised framework might look like, taking the headline structure of the ambition as the kind of starting point. So clearly, poverty and inequality needs to be a key component of that. The 3 pillars need to be a key component of that. But how we effectively work in partnership as well needs to be measured. And we're currently developing those proposals, and over the next, I guess, few weeks or month or so, we want to get out to the chairs of the scrutiny committees to try out our very early thoughts with them before we go any further, with a view to go back and further refine them and present a wider draft for further discussion. And then finally, in terms of review and refine, in terms of the mechanics of reviewing and refining the strategy, the vision going forward, the ambition going forward, we're proposing a light touch review annually, though the first one might be slightly heavier than the light touch review because there's a lot of things happening at the moment. Then into a 3-yearly cycle where the joint strategic assessment, which is the kind of state of the city socioeconomic analysis that we do on a 3-yearly basis, would be the kind of the starting gun to review the strategy again. Though to be honest, we envisage a kind of an ongoing process of strengthening and adapting the strategy as we go forward. Thank you.
Any questions from members? Yeah.
Chair, yesterday I was at the annual general meeting of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, which has plans to spend hundreds of millions of pounds and thousands of man hours in Leeds over the next 2 or 3 years. And it's never even mentioned in here. Have you talked this through with the mayor? And are we sure what we're doing synchronises what she's doing? It seems an enormous omission to me.
So sorry, is that in terms of the best city ambition or these? Sorry.
I don't know the jargon. I'm saying that the Mayor of West Yorkshire can spend hundreds of millions of pounds in Leeds in the next 3 years, and there's a budget for it, and it's not mentioned in this report to Leeds City Council.
Might suggest that's actually a question for the relevant executive member, then, rather than in terms of assurance, because that's the conversation between the leader of the council and the mayor, rather than, I think, which is around the insurance arrangements of how the city is doing it. Unless you're going to frame that in a way that's about how the city is going to assure that.
Have we discussed this paper with the mayor and her officers?
I haven't discussed this paper with the mayor, but we've discussed the best city ambition and the focus of that. And I guess the starting point of our discussions. And I was in a meeting this morning with colleagues from WICA where they are, I believe, hopefully following a lead from us, because they believe that they could benefit from a broader ambition for West Yorkshire. And our best city ambition will be our kind of key input into those discussions and hopefully help shape the wider West Yorkshire ambition.
I think there is a relevant question there, maybe that we take away and ask around what the interlink between, to make sure there isn't any unnecessary duplication, etc., and there's assurance that there is best value for money there. Councillor Trustwell, if you had a question.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Last week, the scrutiny board that I chair received an update on the KPIs relating to those areas that come within our remit, and I'm afraid the brave new world of reporting didn't pass muster because it simply provided comparisons with the previous year. Now, there are two problems with that, one minor, one major. Comparisons with the previous year or the previous 2 years, in most cases, are utterly worthless because the last 2 years were a different world. The main issue is that scrutiny boards and members, and I suppose I'm concentrating on how KPIs and progress or lack of it are communicated to members through scrutiny boards, is that we need to have information over time. We need to see the trajectory over, say, 5 years or even longer, so that we can see the progress or lack of it and ask appropriate questions. So the year-on-year idea, I think, definitely needs to be kicked into touch from a member point of view, especially if you're going to clearly communicate to members progress on KPIs and allow them to meaningfully monitor it. So I would hope that members of this committee, given its remit as a kind of mini far-reaching scrutiny board in its own right, would endorse that view, because certainly the figures as they were produced and provided, and I know that, you know, we're going through a period of transition, I accept that, but this particular element, I think, needs to be rehearsed with officers so that we get back to having more meaningful reporting of progress or otherwise on KPIs. And I would also pick out the reference in the report to benchmarking with core cities. I think that is, again, always a very useful indicator for members on scrutiny boards to be able to compare what's happening in Leeds with other core cities.
Just before I bring officers quickly in to comment on that, does anyone else, because obviously you posed a question to members to a certain extent, do any members have any comment on what Councillor Trustwell has said? Okay, well, there you go. That was a short and quick answer. Did any other, do you want to kind of comment on that kind of meaningful reporting and oversight?
I think we would hope to have robust time series analysis, and we don't hope to have robust benchmarking. And then we want to pick that up with in the first instance with the chairs of scrutiny committees before we go any further. So hopefully we can get off to the right start on that.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Point out that we've been going through a period of transition for 25 years, to my certain knowledge.
Any other questions? No. Okay. So, lost where I am now. Does the committee agree the recommendation set out in the report to consider the governance arrangements outlined in relation to the best city ambition? I'll take the fact that no one's saying out as a yes. So then, okay, we're moving on. Item number 12, Kate.
The annual report was introduced in response to the SIPFA guidance, and I can't remember what SIPFA stands for because I've been using it too often. Looking, yeah. Thank you very much. But 2018 guidance for audit committees that covered audit committees in public local authorities and the police. The report provides a roundup of the work that the committee carried out during the 21-22 municipal year, and provides assurance to council, who are ultimately the body charged with governance, that the committee has received assurances, followed up on concerns, and added value to the governance arrangements for the council. The draft was shared with all those members who were members of the committee last year, and the responses I have received to that email were favourable. Perhaps those who weren't in favour were saving their comments for today, I'm not sure. The report also includes at Appendix B a very brief analysis of how the committee meets the position statement that SIPFA set out in the guidance, and that follows a request from members when we put the position statement in the work programme. I didn't manage the pictures, I'm terribly sorry.
Short and sweet. Any questions from members on that? Yeah.
I have a really picky question. On page, I think it's 104, is that right? 104, there's a table with the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee activity. Way down towards the bottom of that page, it says external audit, certification of housing benefit grant claims, but there's nothing checked off in there. Should there be?
I'm looking at Mary. I'm thinking it's not there because it didn't come as a separate report and it had been previously.
Yes, it's the in previous years, the audit of the housing benefit claim would have been done by the same external auditors as audited our accounts and so on. Under the current regime, it's done separately and it's put out to tender. So we actually have separate auditors for those. What we would normally do is report the outcome of that audit at the next report that we present to this committee. That audit was delayed because of the various issues this year in terms of audit capacity. It was signed off shortly after the March meeting of the committee. So I would intend to report the outcome of that audit when I present the draft accounts at the next meeting of the committee.
Any follow-up?
Yeah, it might be helpful therefore then to just put a footnote or something on that table to explain that, because it just looks absent at the moment.
Any other questions or comment? Yep.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of minor ones from me, please. On page 100, the second paragraph of external audit, I think there's a reference to the 21-22 accounts being the last one of the existing contract. I think it's 22-23 is the last year of the existing contract. And then just over the page at the end of the third paragraph, I think we need to change July to September. In terms of the accounts and VFM sign off for 2021, as we discussed earlier.
Can I pick that up with you and scribble on pieces of paper outside of the meeting? But yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so to the recommendation then, does the committee agree with the recommendation set out in the report to A, note the assurance set out in the report that the committee complies with SIFA's position statement, audit committees in local government and associate and police, and B, approve the draft annual report attached to Appendix A to this report and to authorise the chair of the committee to sign on their behalf. I'll take note. Yeah, once we've got those bits done. I take that's no comment, so that's a yes. So item number 13, the works programme.
The work programme for committee was agreed at the March meeting last year. There have been some slight shifts in it to accommodate the issues with the external audit work and also to move the internal audit annual report and opinion to the September meeting. Because September was looking very hefty, I then moved something else on, and the performance report got moved on to the November meeting. In addition to the work programme, there is a development plan attached to this report, which is aimed to give members the knowledge that they need to be able to fulfil the requirements of the committee and the position statement. So you are requested to approve that development plan and we will implement it.
Councillor Flynn, I believe you had a question.
Yes, I just wonder where whistleblowing sat in the with this committee. I assume it comes under one of the annual assurance reports, but the only mention I've seen of it was in counter fraud, where it talked about the whistleblowing policy had been reviewed to include external references. So if it does fall under the remit, it does, yeah. There's nothing in the forward work programme that I can see, other than I'm assuming an assurance report from HR will come in at some stage, but that's not shown, I don't think, in the forward work programme. So what I'd like to know basically is, you know, what is the whistleblowing policy and its effectiveness? And does it comply with sort of national legislation, PETA? And what the staff think of the whistleblowing policy, not what the official side say. Okay.
Whistleblowing would be covered within the counter fraud and corruption update reports that come biannually each year. So you will see counter fraud, and I'm sure Louise has made a note of the request. There was a review of the whistleblowing policy that took place during the last municipal year. You're just slightly too late onto the committee for that one, councillor. But the reviews will come round on a regular basis, and you will get that information. There is also a report that does come from HR around employment policies, and you will see that on the work programme as well.
It's where it actually sits within our remit. Do we just get reports, or do we always see it and ensure that the whistleblowing policy is carried out in the way in which it should be, and that we're happy that it is being carried out in the way in which it should be?
Councillor Flynn, so I'm actually the whistleblowing officer for the council. So any whistleblowing allegations either come directly to myself and the team, or they get directed to us via other officers if they are whistleblowing concerns. We also have an external email address where people can do anonymous emails, and also we receive whistleblowing letters, which can be obviously anonymous. Most of the anonymous ones actually are via the old-fashioned Royal Mail. So that is what Louise was actually reporting. So we are the custodians of that process.
Obviously, within the confines of confidentiality, it's a very difficult sort of thing to oversee. But how do we know as a group and as a council that it's working?
I mean, obviously by the sounds of it, it's incorporated, but it might be worthwhile that as a briefing note that maybe goes out in a bit, probably more detail that we can get to in this, and then we make that note that in the future reports, because I've got a feeling it's probably quite comprehensive to make sure it's done properly, and probably a bit more than can be gone through in a reasonable fashion in a committee meeting. But I think we get a full briefing note out, because I think it's a reasonable question. Let's get you the detail that you're looking for. Any other comments on the work programme? Okay, so going to the recommendation then. Does the committee agree the recommendation set out in the report to 1, consider and approve the work programme and meeting date at Appendix A, and 2, consider and approve the development plan attached to Appendix B? I'll take silence as that we're accepting that. Fantastic. And so that's it. So the next meeting is planned to take place at 2 p.m. on Friday, the 29th of July, 2022. I conclude the meeting and have a good weekend. Thank you.